And so, beloved ones, we move to part 1b, who are the Israelites. And by way of introduction, we will begin where we stopped. And we realize in Deuteronomy 28 and verse 68 that God had pronounced a curse upon the children of Israel if they would continue to disobey. He pronounced a cursing and a blessing. He said, if you obey, you will be blessed. If you disobey, this curse shall come upon you. And so we read in Deuteronomy 28:68, and the Lord shall bring thee into Egypt again with ships, by the way whereof I spoke unto thee, thou shalt see no more again, and there you shall be sold unto your enemies for bondmen and bondwomen, and no man shall buy you, or more appropriately, no man shall redeem you. So it was prophesied that the children of Israel would return into slavery once again, because they were enslaved in Egypt. They would return into slavery by ships, and they would not return that way again, the way that they went. And they would be sold as slaves, bondmen and bondwomen slaves, and there would be no one to redeem them out of the slavery. And so, beloved ones, we understand that when we look at the Israelites, we know that they came from Israel, whose name was Jacob. And we know Jacob had 12 sons. And the 12 sons, we saw that Leah, Israel's wife, bore Reuben, was the firstborn, Simeon, and Levi, and Judah, and Issachar, and Zebulun. So with Leah, 6 of the tribes, and then we saw with Rachel, Joseph, and Benjamin, it's 8, and with Bilhah, we saw, which is Rachel's handmaid, we saw Dan and Naphtali, which is 10, and after that, and the sons of Zippah, Leah's handmaid, we saw Gad and Asher. So these are the sons of Jacob. These are the 12 tribes of Israel, the 12 tribes. And so if you are a black Israelite, it means to say you must come from one of these tribes. You must be from one of these tribes. And if you are a black Israelite, then you should indicate from which tribe that you are from. So you cannot just claim I am a black Israelite, and then when you are asked from which tribe are you from, then you cannot answer as to which tribe. And so therefore, we must know what we're speaking about when we make claim to being a black Israelite, because an Israelite has to come from the 12 tribes of Israel. And beloved ones, there is no doubt that as we have already proven, but we will continue to prove that the Israelites were dark-skinned people, the same as the Africans or the Hamites. And when we look into the story of Joseph, he was the governor over the land. And it was he who sold to all the people because he interpreted the dream for Pharaoh, as you know, and Pharaoh made him governor. But when his brethren, when they came to Joseph, because you know that they sold Joseph, they threw him down a well and then they sold him. And then, of course, he ended up in Egypt. And when they came for grain, when they saw Joseph, they did not know that it was him. They did not recognize him. And so we see that if Joseph was a different race or complexion to the Egyptians, where he was, then of course his brethren would have quickly recognized him. But when he came, they did not know him. But of course Joseph knew his brethren. Now we will turn to some historical facts, and history records that Africa, that the earliest Jewish settlements were in Africa, in places such as Egypt, Tunisia, Morocco. And Jews had settled along the upper Nile at the Elephantine in Egypt. And it says further that during the great destruction of the Second Temple in 70 AD, where over 30,000 Jews were sold as slaves and Jews fled from Jerusalem, these Jews, they went and joined with Jews that were already settled. They were already settled in Egypt and Tunisia and Morocco. So they went there and joined with these Jews that were already there. So when we look on the map, then we see Morocco to the top of Africa, Tunisia, and so therefore at the north of Africa, and there were already Jewish communities to the north, and then these Jews or Israelites, they went and joined with these Israelites to the north of Africa. Further to that, in early Roman times, and we know Roman times began somewhere in 64 BC. In early Roman times, Moroccan Jews or Israelites had begun to travel inland to trade with a group of Berbers, most of whom were nomads who dwelt in remote areas of the Atlas Mountains. And it is saying that the Jews lived side by side with these Berbers, forging both economical and cultural ties, so much so that some of the Berbers began to practice Judaism. So it is recording a movement from Jews way up in the north as they began to move inland to trade with these Berbers, these African these African Berbers. And these Berbers are an ethnic group indigenous to North Africa. So these Berbers were members of North Africa, Algeria, primarily inhabiting Algeria, Mali, Mauritania, Morocco, northern Niger, Tunisia, Libya, and part of Western Egypt. So these Berbers were there, and the Israelites from the north began to move inland to trade and to mix with these people. Now, imagine there is an area known as the land of the blacks, or this land of the blacks is called Negroland or Nigrisha. It was an archaic term in European mapping describing the inland and by Westerners poly-explored region in West Africa as an area populated with Negro people. And so imagine in Africa, there is a place called the land of the blacks. When we know for sure that Africans are blacks. And so therefore, there was a need to distinguish. There was a need to distinguish the Israelites, which were the descendants of Shem. There was a need to distinguish them from the descendants of Ham. And that is why within Africa, a land, a continent of black people, there was this area known as Negroland, and therefore in that Negroland was an area populated with Negro people. So these Negro people were the Israelites. This area comprised at least the western part of the region called Sudan. It is not the modern country we know as Sudan. The term is probably a direct translation of the Arabic term, Bilad al-Sudan, meaning land of the blacks, corresponding to about the same area. There were various kinds of people in that area, including the Jews of Bilad el-Sudan. Some of the greatest states of those considered part of Negroland was the Borno Empire and the Sokoto Caliphate. So in that area there, the Bilad el-Sudan Jews were there. And remember, the Berbers were there. And of course, you would also find other Africans also living there. But that area was mainly populated. That was the poly-explored region, poly-explored, because the children of Israel, they began to move inland to the poly-explored, the more woodland, more forested area of West Africa, migrating from the north. And so when we look at the map again, we saw that these Berbers, we saw that they were in Mali, Mauritania, Algeria, Niger. So that takes us, beloved one, if you look at the map, you'll see Sahara. And if you look below Sahara, you would see Mauritania, Mali, Niger, Chad, Sudan. You would see that area there. And so when you look at West Africa, Mauritania, Mali, Niger, then this is where the blacks or the black Israelites would have gone to settle. Negroland represented that area between the region of Guinea and Zara, or the desert. The desert meaning the Sahara desert. Guinea, not to be confused with the modern country. So it is not the same as the modern country, but it was Guinea back then, referring then to the south, facing coast of West Africa and the land stretching upriver from there. Herman Moll's 1927 map labeled these as the Grain Coast, the Slave Coast, and the Gold Coast. So this map labeled that area, and we know that area, we've heard that during our history of slavery. We heard of the Grain Coast, the Slave Coast, the Gold Coast. So therefore, Negroland was the territory to the north of this, along the east-west axis of the Niger River and the west-facing coast. Now, you realize we've come across that word Niger, which is pronounced, even in our times, nigger. And nigger has become a very offensive word. But really and truly, it simply means the people who dwelt alongside, the Niger River, the Niger River. And so therefore, we have to begin to put, these things into proper perspective. And therefore the map here shows Guinea, and Guinea, you have the different coasts, the Grain Coast, the Gold Coast, the Slave Coast in Guinea, and above that you have Negroland. And so that map gives you a good perspective of where it was located. And it was located northwest Africa. The Jews of continuing in his historical records, the Jews of the Bilad al-Sudan. And Jews of Bilad al-Sudan describe West African Jewish communities who were connected to known Jewish communities from the Middle East, North Africa, or Spain and Portugal. And various historical records attest to the presence at one time in Ghana, Mali, Songhai Empire, then called the Bilad as Sudan from the Arabic meaning land of the blacks. And so again, it is recorded that these Jews dwelt in the same region which was labeled Negroland. Now, really, when we take a deeper look into the word Negroland, it is equal to Sudan. And Negroland comprised the western part of the region called Sudan or Sudan, not to be confused with the African country, because we're looking at an earlier time in history. In earlier times, the portion of West Africa all the way which stretched across east to Sudan and Abyssinia, modern Ethiopia. So really you need to look at the ancient map so that you could locate this area properly. So this area was known as Judah. The So means land of, and Judah equals to Judah. And you know that Joshua and Yeshua, before it was Y, and then it was turned to J. So you know Judah was Judah. Thus the meaning land of Judah. So land of Judah was also that same area called Negroland. Therefore, this whole strip of land from West Africa to East Africa was known as Judah or Sudan, and its inhabitants were multiple Black Jewish communities. And so once you Google these things, beloved ones, you could easily find these things recorded on the internet if you want to do further studies on that. So Judah or Suda, land of Judah, Negroland, all these things are one and the same. So it is that area again stretching from Mauritania, Mali, Niger, and going across from West Africa. So therefore, Suda became Sudan. So this eventually was changed to Sudan, which later got changed to Sudan. So you have S-O-U-D-A-N, Sudan, and then you have S-U-D-A-N, Sudan. During Arabic dominance in Africa, the territory of Sudan was divided into Western Sudan, which is Negroland proper. Then you have Central Sudan, and then you have Eastern Sudan, which is Ethiopia and Abyssinia. So therefore, in modern time, if you're looking at a modern map, then that area has been now divided into East, West, and Central Sudan. The latter term Sudan for the area was believed to be a direct translation of the Arabic term Bilad al-Sudan, meaning land of the blacks. So we have no doubt, beloved ones, absolutely no doubt that the Israelites went down into Africa, West Africa, the middle of Africa, sub-Saharan Africa, and formed this land called the land of the blacks. So we have absolutely no doubt to that. Now, as we go further, we know that there has been a problem with, as I said, Negro, Black, Nigger, and all these things, have all these words have come up, and then, people have problems, finding the meaning and being able to explain these things. And it is recorded that Negro superseded colored as the most polite word for African Americans at the time when Black was considered more offensive. In colonial America during the 17th century, the term Negro was, according to one historian, also used to describe Native American. Now this judge, he was a judge of South Carolina, and he wrote the digest for the Negro law. He wrote the digest for the Negro law of South Carolina in 1848. And he explained that the term Negro is confined to slave Africans, the ancient Berbers. Now we know that the ancient Berbers, and as is recorded in history, and the Israelites dwelt together. And so he's saying that the term Negro was confined to them and their descendants. It does not embrace the free inhabitants of Africa, such as the Egyptians, the Moors, or the Negro Asiatics, such as the Lackas. So he's saying that term Negro does not apply to all Black people, but specifically to those that were taken into slavery, such as the ancient Berbers, because we know for a fact that, they were the first set of people that were brought, from Africa into slavery. And he's saying it does not apply to the Egyptians, because the Egyptians also are Black, and the Moors are Black, and the Lascars are also Black. But he's saying that Negro does not apply to them, but a specific set of people. Now, there is a very interesting definition, and that is found in the Zondervan Compact Bible Dictionary. The Zondervan Compact Bible Dictionary. Because we know that Noah had 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. And we know Ham, it says the youngest son of Noah born probably 96 years before the flood, and of the 8th person to live through the flood, he became the progenitor of the dark races, not the Negroes, but the Egyptians, the Ethiopians, Libyans, and Canaanites. So according to the Zondervan Compact Bible Dictionary, that the Negroes are not descendants of Ham. The descendants of Ham are the Egyptians, the Ethiopians, the Libyans, and the Canaanites. But the Negroes are descendants of Shem, which are the descendants of the Israelites. So that is clearly recorded in history. Now, we would take some time to look at the Atlantic slave trade, because we believe that, as we saw, Deuteronomy 28:68 refers to the children of Israel being taken into slavery as bondmen and bondwomen. And we saw that the Atlantic slave trade, or the transatlantic slave trade, involved the transportation by slave traders of enslaved African people, mainly to the Americas. The slave trade regularly used the triangular trade route as its middle passage and existed from the 16th to the 19th century. The vast majority of those who were enslaved and transported in the transatlantic slave trade were Africans from Central and Western Africa. So this is saying to us the very same region that we were looking at, Sub-Sahara, West Africa, Sub-Sahara, West Africa, according to, Wikipedia, that the majority of those who were enslaved was from that very same region that we looked at, who were sold by other West Africans to Western European slave traders, with a small number being captured directly by slave traders in coastal raid who brought them to America. So we know for a fact that history records, there is no doubt that history records that the same area identified as Negroland, the land of the blacks, the land of Judah, the majority of slaves were taken from that region. And that region, as we identified, was the region that was poorly explored and poorly developed at the time. But what we need to know also, that it was not only, number one, Negroland was not totally the children of Israel. As we know, they were also the Berbers and the descendants of the Berbers, and they were also other Africans. And other Africans were also taken into slavery as well. And so therefore, we cannot conclude, we cannot conclude that it was only Israelites that were brought into the Caribbean as slaves. That would be a wrong conclusion to make. And two, as we have seen, that the descendants of Ham were black people, just as the descendants of Shem. And so therefore, we cannot claim that because someone is black, that he is a Shemite or an Israelite. And this map This map shows us where the majority, the darker green means the majority of slaves came from there. And the darker green, as we have identified, is Negroland. And this is Central West Africa. And that is where we identified Negroland to be. But if we look at the map, north of that also slaves came from there, and also Central Africa, and going down to southwest Africa, you also had slaves that came from that region also. And so therefore it is safe to conclude that both the descendants of Ham and the descendants of Shem were both taken into slavery and brought to the Americas and also to the Caribbean. This is a safe conclusion. And again, this is Negroland, as we saw, Central West Africa, and Guinea, which is Sub-Sahara, and Guinea, the various coasts of Guinea, the Green Coast, the Gold Coast, the Slave Coast. These areas also have been identified. Also, when we look at the Arab slave trade, and the Arab slave trade, beloved ones, came through the Ottoman Empire. And for those of you who are following the prophecy of Daniel 11, this Sabbath night would be our third night. And this is a night that you would not want to miss, because this and the third night we would be going on to the period of time known as the end times. This is the last few verses of Daniel 11, beginning from verse 45 thereabout. And really, I mentioned that because the Ottoman Empire has to do with the second leg of Rome, which is which took over from the Byzantine Empire, which is the Turkish Empire. So the Arab slave trade took place under the rise of the Ottoman Empire. And the Arab slave trade was the intersection of slavery and trade in the Arab world, mainly in West Asia, North Africa, the Horn of Africa, Southeast Africa, and Europe. This battle occurred chiefly between the medieval era and the early 20th century. The trade was conducted through slave markets in this area, with slaves captured mostly from Africa's interior and Southern Europe. So it is saying here that most of the slaves, it is saying the slaves captured mostly from Africa's interior, which is, of course, Sub-Sahara. The Arab slave trade across the Sahara Desert and across the Indian Ocean began after the Muslim, Arab, and Swahili traders won control of the Swahili coast and sea routes during the 9th century. Right? These traders captured Bantu people from the interior in present-day Kenya, Mozambique, Tunisia, and brought them to the coast. Some historians assert that as many as 17 million people were sold into slavery on the coast of the Indian Ocean. So you have both, as we saw, Africans, Indians, North Africa. Approximately 5 African slaves were bought by Muslim slave traders and taken from Africa across the Red Sea, Indian Ocean, and Sahara Desert between 1500 and 1900. And if you look at the map, beloved ones, the map explains it all. So if you look at Africa and you look at the red lines, the red arrows, you would see that the red arrows represents the origin and the movement of slaves across Africa. And if you look at from where these red arrows originate, you would see that they originate sub-Sahara. As we understood by the reading that the Muslims in the Ottoman or the Turkish Empire moved slaves across the Sahara Desert. And this sub-Sahara region, again, is the same area identified as Negroland. And therefore, when we look at the Arab slave trade, when we look at the European slave trade, the transatlantic slave trade, and the Arab slave trade, we come to the same conclusion that slaves were taken in that same place identified as Negroland and the land of the blacks, the land of Judah. So there is no doubt, beloved ones, that the children of Israel, along with the children of Ham, were taken into slavery and brought to the Caribbean, America, Europe, different parts of the world. And again, our map, Sub-Sahara, again, this is an ancient map, not a modern map, but it's an ancient map showing you that area identified as Judah, or the land of Judah, or the land of the blacks. And as I said, the Africans were black, but then again, it was entitled Land of the Blacks to distinguish it from the children of Shem, which came into Africa and occupied the more poorly explored areas of Africa. So to summarize this portion, beloved ones, as we come to an end of part 1B, to summarize, we understand that the Israelites are the descendants of Shem, one of Noah's sons, and are therefore called Semites, but more specifically descendants of Eber. And Eber was of the 3rd generation, and Eber was Hebrew. For in his days was the earth divided according to the languages. And as I said, Eber, all the children of Israel, the Israelites were Hebrews. And they were Hebrews because they descended from Eber, and Eber spoke Hebrew. And it was in the days of Eber that the language was confounded, and they spoke different languages. But I believe that the original language was not taken away from them. And I believe that original language was Hebrew, and then Eber retained that language of Hebrew. And therefore the children of Israel, the Israelites, being descendants of Eber, they spoke Hebrew. More specifically, they are the descendants of Abraham, which is the sixth. Abraham is the sixth generation with whom Yahweh establishes covenant, and more so the descendants of Israel, which is Jacob, from whom we get the 12 tribes. So therefore we understand, beloved ones, that the 12 tribes of Israel is of a specific lineage and is of a specific descendant. And it is not all Black people that are Israelites. They are of a specific lineage, coming from the lineage of Shem and the lineage of Eber. Now, Shem, we know, is the brother to Ham, whose name means black. As we saw, Ham means black. But by virtue of the scriptures, we know that the Israelites also were dark-skinned people like the descendants of Ham. After the destruction of Jerusalem in 70 AD, many of the Israelites were sold into slavery, and many fled to Africa and neighboring lands. Negroland has been identified by many to have been a land of Israelites. During the Arab slave trade and the Atlantic slave trade, many of the Israelites were transported to the Americas and the Caribbean, and where their identity was stolen from them, and where they were made to worship gods other than the God of Israel. Now, remember that the land was divided according to the language. And that is why you have Japan, and they speak Japanese, and Spain, Spanish, and Germans, they speak according, to the language. And we that let's say we are in St. Lucia, and if we were to ask, where are we from? Where are we from? Where are we from? It means to say, what language do we speak? So we speak English. So if we speak English, then it means that we from England. We are English. Now, if we speak French, we speak a broken patois, which is some type of twisted French. It means to say that we are from France. And so it means to say there is no there was no land, that was no language that was St. Lucian. So really it means that we have no, we have no identity, as St. Lucians, because the lands were divided according to the language. So Eber, was Hebrew, and they spoke They spoke Hebrew. So some of the Israelites have returned to their homeland, while many more still reside in Africa, awaiting the fulfillment of Bible prophecy, where God Almighty himself will take them home. And so as we continue, because remember at the beginning we had asked the question, the people who now occupies Israel or the land of Israel, are they Israelites? Those that occupy the land of Israel, are they Israelites? And when we ask, are they Israelites, it means to say, are they descendants of Abraham, Isaac, and of Jacob? And another question that we ask is that the fact that Israel is now a nation, does that fulfill the prophecy? Does that fulfill the prophecy where God said that he will gather all his people from the four corners of the earth and bring them back into the land of Israel? And as it is recorded in Ezekiel, he will sprinkle clean water over them and give them, remove their stony heart, give them a heart of flesh. Does that establishment of the nation of Israel, does it fulfill such prophecy? And these are some of the things that we will look at: the salvation of Israel, the fulfillment of the scripture which says that when the fullness of the Gentiles shall come in, all Israel shall be saved. These are some of the things that we will look at as we continue with this study, and whether Jews, the term Jews, whether it is the same as Israelites, where all Israelites are Jews. These are some of the things that we will continue to study in the presentations that lies ahead. So this brings an end, beloved ones, at this time to our presentation.